The criminal world of Liverpool was seriously shaken. Three guys broke into a father and son's house and made off with a 30-kilogram stash of prohibited substances. The robbery sent shockwaves through the city's underworld. The gang that owned the stolen batch was once considered untouchable. A secret informant reported that the guys who lost goods worth £1 million were at the top of the city's criminal hierarchy. No one could believe that someone would dare to steal from them. Police managed to crack the case by gaining access to their phones, and in May 2022, some of them found themselves behind bars. However, Liverpool's gangs were still furious and tried to get to anyone they believed was involved in the heist. Rumors circulated that 35-year-old Joseph Nee had been gathering information for them. Joseph Nee had only recently been released from prison, where he served time for drug distribution and robbery. He was granted early release and was required to comply with parole conditions. Nee was part of a gang that trafficked Class A controlled substances into Liverpool, the most dangerous of them all. Joseph wasn't considered the most popular guy even within his criminal circle, and some had even targeted him before because even his own associates viewed him as an informant and a snitch. On August 22, 2022, Joseph and his friends gathered at a mutual acquaintance's house to watch a football match between Liverpool and United. The game ended at 21:52, and shortly after, Joseph left the house with one of his friends, Paul Abraham. Later, Paul would recount that they were simply walking down the street when, at 21:59, they heard three loud pops. Of course, they had heard such sounds before and instantly recognized them as gunshots. The men started running. The shooter circled around and began firing at the men from behind at close range. The attacker was very close to his target and, of course, knew how to handle a firearm. As a result, the bullet struck Joseph in the upper abdomen, and he fell immediately. Paul Abraham leaped over his fallen, wounded friend and sprinted towards the park gates. It might not have been the noblest behavior towards a friend, but perhaps he knew that it wasn't worth risking his life for Joseph. At that moment, the armed man was in a perfect position. Unlike his victim, Joseph lay unarmed, wounded, and defenseless on the ground, while the stranger, dressed in black and wearing a balaclava, confidently approached him, holding a 9mm pistol. Joseph begged for mercy, but the stranger paid no attention to his pleas and coldly squeezed the trigger. The shot could only have been lethal, but obviously the universe was on Joseph's side at that moment. As they say, the gun jammed and it didn't fire. Joseph didn't miss this chance to jump up and, despite his wound, run away. Surprisingly, the shooter was prepared for any turn of events. He calmly retrieved two weapons, a revolver, and continued the pursuit, never ceasing to fire. Meanwhile, Joseph was running in the direction of King's Hit Avenue, an ordinary street where ordinary families lived. This was the home of 46-year-old Cheryl Corbell and her three children, Chloe, Ryan, and their younger sister, 9-year-old Olivia, who everyone called Liv. Of course, all the residents on the street who were at home heard that there was some commotion outside. Some realized that these were gunshots, while others were puzzled about what was happening. Among them was Cheryl. The woman opened the door and looked out onto the street, as many would have done in her place. However, Joseph noticed the light in the partially open door, and he ran as fast as he could toward Cheryl's house. The woman was horrified to see an injured man approaching her, followed by an armed man in a mask. Quickly assessing the situation and realizing that it was not worth getting involved in the gang's altercation, she rushed back into the house and tried to slam the door. Unfortunately, the dropped latch prevented her from doing so. Joseph, desperate to escape and knowing that his time was running out because his pursuer was about to catch up with him, pounded on the door, begging the homeowner for help. Cheryl had already realized that these were some criminal gang troubles, and being a Liverpool resident, she understood that she and her family would face trouble if she got involved in something like this. So, she ordered the man to leave. She must have felt sorry for the wounded man, but her desire to protect her own children outweighed everything else. However, Joseph had no intention of leaving. He threw himself against the door with all his weight, breaking inside, knowing that this would bring enormous problems to the family. The man burst inside and collapsed on the floor, weakened from the chase and the gunshot wound. But the pursuer didn't back down. He saw Joseph Nee enter the house. Another person might have thought that there would always be another day, another opportunity to reach the target. But the shooter had no intention of giving up. He had a mission to accomplish, regardless of who he harmed. The commotion near the front door of the house, which had now shifted into the hallway, was accompanied by noise. Chloe, Ryan, and Olivia were sleeping, but they woke up due to the loud sounds. Ryan recalls that he was in his room when he heard 3 loud noises followed by quick footsteps. It was his younger sister, Olivia, running downstairs, crying out, "Mom, I'm scared!" Ryan also came out of his room but stayed at the top of the stairs, watching in bewilderment as chaos unfolded below. He looked down and wondered who this man lying in the hallway was. He saw his mother trying to close the door, and his younger sister stood just a few steps away from the front door. Olivia wanted to be closer to her mother. She went down to her, crying, "Mom, I'm scared! Mom, I'm scared!" The assailant at this moment could not ignore the child's cries. He knew that Joseph Nee had burst into the home of an ordinary family with no connection to their disputes. He saw Cheryl trying to eject the stranger from the house, saw Joseph attempting to get inside, and heard Olivia's cries. However, none of this mattered to him because he simply started shooting through the gap in the door without thinking about where the bullets might hit. A bullet struck Cheryl, entering her right hand. But even though she was in pain, she continued to battle with the door. Joseph, at this moment, regained his senses to the point where he began to help her. He shouted at her to call the police because the shooter was still trying to force his way in. The shooter managed to push his hand with the revolver through the gap in the door. While Joseph began to plead with him to stop again, Cheryl jammed the door, including his hand with the weapon, before he began shooting once more. A bullet hit the door frame. Finally, the shooter decided he had spent too much time and retreated. Cheryl was able to breathe a sigh of relief, stopped struggling with the door, and rushed to comfort her daughter. She wasn't concerned about her own wound. The most important thing was to hug Olivia and tell her that everything would be okay, that no one would harm her now. Cheryl noticed that there was a lot of blood on Olivia's pajamas and thought that her wound on her arm was bleeding heavily. But then she lifted her daughter's shirt and realized that it wasn't her blood. Olivia had been shot. The same bullet that had injured Cheryl had gone through her right hand and into Olivia's chest. Olivia was gasping for air. Her mother knelt beside her, begging her daughter to stay with her. Ryan, who still hadn't realized that his sister was wounded, began shouting at Joseph to get out. But the uninvited guest had no intention of staying. Joseph managed to make a call and was picked up by his 2 friends in an SUV. They rushed him to the hospital, not giving a second thought to the condition they left the family members in, whose lives had just been forever changed. They simply abandoned them amidst all the chaos. While Cheryl called for help, she held Olivia in her arms and instructed her son to continuously apply pressure to the wound on Olivia's chest. Only then did the boy realize that his sister was injured. Olivia's lips had turned blue, and the bleeding had stopped. Ryan assisted his mother in carrying Olivia upstairs. They tried to stop the bleeding with towels. A neighbor arrived, attempting to offer some assistance. Cheryl desperately tried to keep Olivia conscious. Later, she would tell the police that at some point, Olivia's body went limp, and her eyes rolled upwards. It was at that moment that Cheryl realized Olivia had passed away. The police arrived at 10:10 p.m. An officer felt Olivia's faint heartbeat, and they carried her out of the house, rushing her to the nearest children's hospital in an ambulance. They held on to hope, but the doctors were unable to do anything. Olivia was pronounced dead at 11:24 p.m. Cheryl wasn't by her side when she passed, as she was receiving medical attention herself. Just a few hours earlier, it had been a normal, happy family, and now a mother and son were left as witnesses to the death of their 9-year-old daughter and sister. Meanwhile, a man named Thomas Cashman, known as Tommy, dressed in black but without the balaclava, rushed to the home of his former lover with whom he had a very brief affair. He entered her house without permission, scaring her terribly as he entered her bedroom. He was agitated and claimed that someone had tried to kill him and he wanted to kill that person in return. In other words, he needed her help, and he was willing to say anything to get it. He even stated that she was the only one he could trust, despite having a fiancée with whom he had spent many years. The woman believed Tommy and offered him shelter for the night. However, the next morning, when all the media were buzzing about the shocking crime, she realized that Tommy had been involved in the shootout and was responsible for the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbel. Now, involuntarily, she became an accomplice. The woman was horrified by this prospect. On one hand, she didn't want to cover up a child killer, but on the other hand, any Liverpool resident knows how dangerous it can be to cross paths with criminal gangs. Uncertain about what to do, She called her boyfriend, Paul Russell. Paul arrived and had a private conversation with Tommy. Tommy immediately confessed to Paul that he had been hunting Joseph, but was abruptly cut off by Joseph, who asked him not to say anything about it to avoid implicating him in the crime. It was a very reasonable move on Joseph's part. What remains unclear is why he later made a significant mistake, giving Tommy different clothes, helping him get rid of the items he was wearing, and taking him to where his car was parked. Perhaps Paul understood that Tommy could pose a threat to him or his girlfriend and chose to assist him, but this act of help to a killer will likely have serious consequences for Paul as well. During this period, the investigation into the murder was in progress. Joseph Nee, who had suffered injuries, much like Cheryl and Olivia, declined to cooperate with the police. His primary concern was self-preservation, as the looming threat of returning to prison for violating his parole weighed heavily on him. Despite being involved in the criminal underworld, Joseph should have been able to surmise the identity of his assailant and whose orders the killer was following. Nevertheless, he informed the officers that anyone could have taken a shot at him that night. It's noteworthy that Joseph was not the only one apprehensive about engaging with law enforcement. Olivia had become the third Liverpool resident to succumb to gunshot wounds within a week, not to mention the numerous incidents where victims were shot but survived. In a city aptly nicknamed the British Amsterdam, crossing paths with criminal gangs was indeed perilous. A reward for information on Olivia's assailant had been announced, which quickly swelled to a record-high amount of £200,000, thanks to an anonymous contributor who added £100,000 to the fund. However, despite this substantial incentive, no one came forward with information. Nonetheless, the police succeeded in identifying a suspect, 34-year-old Thomas Cashman. He was a father of two, aged 4 and 14, engaged to a girl he had been dating since their school days. The family resided in a spacious suburban house in West Derby. Tommy had previously worked at a car wash, but his current lifestyle was vastly different. Officially unemployed, he rented a house that, in reality, belonged to the gang's leader. It was evident that his involvement in criminal activities afforded him a lavish life. Fortunately, Liverpool boasted extensive CCTV coverage, making it challenging to perpetrate an attack without being captured on camera. Investigation revealed that at 8:30 p.m., Tommy returned home, swiftly changed into black attire, and left his residence. He didn't make much effort to conceal himself while hunting his target. Surveillance footage documented him passing the house on Finch Lane several times before traversing past it once more. Tommy was convinced that his target was inside that house, having closely monitored his movements. He had even attempted to attack him earlier that day, though that endeavor had failed. When Joseph finally left the house, Tommy was resolute in his intent to eliminate him. However, fate took a different course, and an innocent bystander fell victim to a stray bullet. Such are the consequences when the worlds of ordinary individuals and criminals collide. Tommy's trousers, which he had provided to Paul Russell, were discovered at his sister's residence bearing his DNA. Gunpowder residue was also found on his right leg. Video evidence, DNA profiling, and gunpowder residue collectively linked him to the attack on Joseph. Yet the investigation had another valuable asset: a courageous witness who risked his life to oppose Liverpool's criminal underworld. In the early hours of September 4th, 2022, Tommy was apprehended while hiding at a friend's apartment. In October 2022, Tommy was formally charged with Olivia's murder, the attempted murder of Joseph and Cheryl, as well as possession of a firearm. Paul Russell faced charges of aiding and abetting, despite his earnest efforts to distance himself from the case. The trial of Tommy took place in Manchester in March 2023. Tommy denied all allegations. He claimed he hadn't killed anyone and that he appeared on the video because he was a local drug dealer, making deliveries that day and buying toys for his sick child. He added that he had no intention of killing anyone that day and that he had been friends with Joseph Nee for the past 10 years. However, his words were completely contradicted by a key prosecution witness. The remarkable effect came when Tommy's former girlfriend, who had sheltered him immediately after the crime, appeared in court. It was an incredibly brave move on her part, considering she lived in a city where many of Tommy's friends and gang members resided. Naturally, she would be protected under a witness protection program. As the police stated, she received more threats of violence than any other witness in Merseyside police history. She had to completely abandon her previous life, yet she chose to do the right thing. The witness explained her decision by saying that one should not be afraid to come forward when it involves the murder of a 9-year-old Olivia. The witness described how the accused came to her after the murder, trying to secure her support to create a false alibi. It's unclear why he couldn't ask his own fiancée for this favor. Tommy's defense team attempted to twist her words, suggesting that she wanted to frame her former lover because he refused to leave his fiancée for her. It was an absurd attempt to discredit the witness, and despite their efforts, she remained highly convincing. Following the witness's example, other people also found the courage to approach the police. They revealed that within criminal circles, Tommy was known as a contract killer or a hitman. He had been hired for various murders and was suspected in other homicide cases and assassination attempts, including another attempt on Joseph Nee's life with the same weapon used to kill Olivia on that fateful day. In fact, the same weapon had been used on January 27, 2020, when a 19-year-old was shot. It was evident that Tommy had hired a criminal cartel to assassinate Joseph Nee. On March 30th, after 3.5 weeks of court proceedings, the jury unanimously found Thomas Cashman guilty on all counts. The sentencing was scheduled for April 3rd. On the same day, Olivia's family intended to address the court, speaking to the murderer and recounting how the crime he committed had affected their entire family. However, Tommy refused to even appear in court on that day. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole at a minimum of 42 years, making him 76 years old upon potential release. The judge commented on her decision, explaining that she would have preferred to sentence him to life without parole. However, she had to acknowledge the fact that Tommy didn't intend to kill Olivia. If he had intended to kill a child, he would have received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It was evident to everyone in court that his target was another criminal. The judge took into consideration that he was also a father and wouldn't be able to see his children as often as he would have liked, but that was solely his own fault. She emphasized that the man's refusal to appear in court was not taken into account. Paul Russell was also found guilty of aiding and abetting and is currently in prison awaiting his sentence. Olivia's mother, Cheryl, had hoped to look the killer in the eyes and express her thoughts about him. However, he deprived her of this opportunity by not appearing in court. Cheryl admits that she didn't know he could simply choose not to come. Therefore, Olivia's family, particularly Cheryl and Olivia's Aunt Antonia, are advocating for changes in the law to require criminals to appear in court during sentencing and meet face-to-face with the victims' families. Since Olivia's murder, not much time has passed, and her mother admits that during these few months, she has been driven to madness by the deafening silence in their home. Olivia, from her childhood, was a chatterbox and giggler. If Olivia had survived in just 5 days, she would have performed a truly noble act. She intended to donate her hair to a charitable organization. She was eager to help an organization that makes wigs for sick children and had decided to cut off a whole 12 inches of her locks. People would have understood what a tremendous gesture it was coming from a 9-year-old girl. Giving a piece of herself to another child who needed it more would have shown just how wonderful Olivia was. The complete opposite of the people who invaded her home that August night in 2022 when Olivia took a bullet meant for a criminal. In memory of Olivia, other children created a beautiful corner in the park where she loved to play. They painted an enormous butterfly on the wall and planted flowers of a beautiful pink color. During Olivia's farewell at the church, hundreds of people gathered. Everything was adorned with pink butterflies. Olivia's mother, Cheryl, bid a moving farewell to her daughter, saying that Liv was loved and adored by everyone who knew her. She will never be forgotten. Cheryl added, "I won't say goodbye, but I'll say goodnight. I love you. We'll see you in the morning."
Help me find my way home. My name is Paulette. I'm 4 years old. I have a speech and walking impairment and a scar on the left side of my back. I can't survive on my own. I need my parents. If Paulette Gabarra Farah were alive today, she would be 15 years old. She would probably be attending high school, showing a passion for drawing and reading. Instead, 4-year-old Paulette Gabarra was found dead under suspicious circumstances on March 30th, 2010. Lizeth Farah and Mauricio Gabarra Raha got married in 2001 in front of 600 guests. They exchanged wedding vows in a Catholic church in the small town of Lomas de Tecamachalco, Naucalpan, in the state of Mexico. Lizeth Farah was the daughter of Lydia Farah Morales and Bachara Naim Farah, an immigrant from Lebanon and a prominent businessman. From a very young age, Lizeth enjoyed the privileges of being born into a wealthy family. She attended the best private schools in Mexico City and eventually became an accomplished lawyer. Mauricio, for his part, became a successful businessman, thriving in real estate alongside his brothers. Soon the couple had their first child, a girl named Lizeth. On July 20th, 2005, Paulette Guevara Farah was born. She was born at 25 weeks, weighing only 800 grams and measuring 35 centimeters. She was so tiny that doctors didn't believe she would survive. But Paulette proved them all wrong. However, while she did survive, being born prematurely resulted in ongoing health issues. Paulette had trouble speaking, and doctors predicted she would never walk. Once again, Paulette proved them wrong. She learned to walk thanks to equine therapy. After that, she fell in love with horses. Raising a second child wasn't as easy for Lizeth and Mauricio as it had been with their first daughter. Paulette required constant visits to pediatricians, expensive medications, and therapies. She couldn't form sentences and could only say mama, papa, water, and food. And even though she could attend daycare with other children her age, she still required medical assistance and constant attention. The last time Paulette was seen was on Sunday evening, March 21st, 2010. She had just returned from a weekend in Valle de Bravo, about a 3-hour drive from Mexico City, with her father and her 7-year-old sister. They arrived at their home in Huixquilucan, in the state of Mexico, around 9 p.m. Her mother, Lizeth Farah, had not gone on the trip. Instead, she had traveled to Los Cabos with her friend Amanda. However, she returned home at the same time as the rest of her family. Later, Lizeth would say she clearly remembered putting her daughter to bed, kissing her goodnight, and leaving the room. The next morning, one of Paulette's nannies told the parents the little girl was missing. I looked in the bathroom, under the bed, in the closet. I couldn't find her, so I checked the parents' room, then her sister's room, and then searched again, the nanny explained. Erica Casimira and her sister Martha were responsible for keeping the family's luxurious 2-story apartment clean. They also took care of the girls. That morning, they helped the older daughter get ready for school and waited with her until the school bus picked her up at 7 a.m. At 8 a.m., they went to get little Paulette ready for daycare. When they found her room empty, they immediately informed Lizeth and Mauricio. The child was searched for everywhere, not just inside the apartment, but throughout the building, in the elevators, the garden, near the pool, on the playground, and in the parking lot. But Paulette was nowhere to be found. They spoke with neighbors and security guards, who also hadn't seen the girl. That's when they called the police. The investigation was led by Alfredo Castillo, then Deputy Attorney General, and Alberto Bazbaz, Attorney General of Mexico State. Forensic teams were immediately called in to assist the investigation, and soon the apartment was filled with officers and detectives. However, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry or struggle, and most importantly, no clues as to Paulette's whereabouts. The only possible point of entry was the window in the girl's second-floor room, but it hadn't been broken or tampered with. The family lived in a secured residential community, but neither the security guards nor surveillance cameras had seen anything unusual. Paulette's photos were quickly posted everywhere, and every media outlet began asking the same questions. Was Paulette kidnapped? Could she have wandered off on her own? Could she still be alive? While Paulette was considered missing, she became the focus of all conversations. This case attracted widespread attention, partly because so many children go missing in Mexico, and, according to many, not enough is done to find them quickly. But when a girl from a wealthy family disappeared, the authorities mobilized all their resources to locate her. Her photos truly were everywhere. Help me find my way home. My name is Paulette. I'm 4 years old. I have a speech and walking impairment and a scar on the left side of my back. I can't survive on my own. I need my parents. That's what was written on posters showing the little girl's image. On March 27, several news crews were invited into the family's apartment. Lizeth, sitting on her daughter's bed, recalled what had happened that night. She had put her daughter to sleep, kissed her goodnight, and left the room. She didn't hear any strange noises during the night. The family dogs didn't bark, and everything seemed fine. The girl's parents, especially her mother, gave numerous interviews, pleading for the safe return of their daughter. She's an angel, a beautiful little girl. She never cries, never throws tantrums. She's the most wonderful child, her mother would say. Paulette's mysterious disappearance soon led to one of the largest public campaigns in Mexico City. Lizeth repeatedly recounted that Sunday evening when her beautiful daughter vanished without a trace, leaving the family in despair. But how could it be a kidnapping, she asked, if there was no ransom demand? Maybe aliens took her? She once tried to joke. Or maybe it was Harry Potter? When Lizeth and Mauricio spoke to the public on national television, the entire country sympathized with the parents, devastated by the horror of their missing 4-year-old daughter, unaware that they would soon become the main suspects in Paulette's death. 9 days after the search began, on March 31st, Paulette's body was found. She was discovered in the bed in her own room, the very room she had allegedly vanished from over a week earlier. It looked as though the girl had been lying there the entire 9 days, wedged between the mattress and the footboard of her bed. Each night, Paulette had to wear a special orthopedic mouthpiece to prevent her from sleeping with her mouth open, and it may have contributed to her death. It was reported that when the little girl was found under blankets stained with red marks, the coroner allegedly exclaimed in shock, "They beat her to death. They beat her to death." But later the police declined to explain that statement. Most likely it wasn't blood, but fluid stains caused by decomposition, as there were no signs of sexual or physical violence on the body. According to the autopsy, Paulette died from asphyxiation caused by obstruction of her airways and compression of her chest and abdomen. Officials concluded that Paulette had twisted in her sleep and accidentally slipped into the gap between the mattress and the footboard, where she suffocated. A tragic accident, but still an accident. The case should have been closed and forgotten. Yet even now, over 10 years after her disappearance and death, the Paulette case continues to stir controversy and conspiracy theories. Few people believe the full truth of what happened that night has been revealed. What remains most puzzling is how no one noticed the little girl trapped in the bed for 9 days. Over 100 people entered that room during the search. Even Attorney General Alberto Basbas personally checked under the bed during the investigation. He moved the mattress and the blanket and saw nothing. Even specially trained search dogs were brought into the child's room, and somehow they didn't detect the scent of the body. It's hard to believe that forensic investigators searched the room multiple times and still didn't find her. Basbas maintained that the girl likely twisted in her sleep, got stuck between the mattress and wooden base of the bed, and died from suffocation. He reported that according to the autopsy, Paulette had been dead for 5 to 9 days, meaning she likely died the night she disappeared. But oddly enough, another analysis later concluded that she had only been in that exact spot for 3 days, not 9. The new findings contradicted earlier claims, such as the assertion that the body hadn't been moved after death. Worse still, the new evidence was never officially accepted by the authorities responsible for the investigation. Even more horrifying was the fact that relatives and family friends had stayed in Paulette's bed in the days after her disappearance, and no one noticed anything. The obvious question arose, had no one even changed the bed sheets once during that entire time? They had. The nannies changed the sheets multiple times, and the police even asked them to reenact their actions to test whether it was possible to change the bedding without noticing the child. The nannies insisted they would have seen the girl, both when they were searching and when they were making the bed, but she wasn't there. Apparently, the reason no one noticed her was the sheer number of blankets and quilts on the bed, which hid not only Paulette's small body, but also the smell that began to spread in the room. The police claimed that during the week they spent at the Gabara home, they searched every room, followed every procedure, and questioned everyone they could. Eventually, they concluded that the parents or the nannies who lived in the apartment were involved in Paulette's death, because only they were present when the incident occurred. They also discovered the parents had been lying from the start. It wasn't them searching the building for their daughter. It was the nannies, who checked every floor in hopes of finding the little girl. And it wasn't them who called the police. It was Mauricio's sister who called after speaking with him. Erica Casimira, Paulette's nanny, would later testify, "After searching everywhere for Paulette, I found her mother sitting here drinking coffee and smoking a cigarette, while her father calmly searched a closet." Over time, behind the glamorous image of the couple, serious problems began to emerge, both personal and financial. The couple had such severe money troubles that they occasionally had to borrow from the Casimira sisters. Their marriage was falling apart. In fact, Lizeth had gone to Los Cabos to meet up with a lover and spent the weekend partying and drinking. By April, the couple's growing conflict became obvious. Only Mauricio's relatives attended the church service, while only Lizeth's relatives showed up at the funeral. The pair also began fighting over custody of their older daughter. Soon, the couple turned fully against each other. Lizeth accused Mauricio of orchestrating the entire situation. Mauricio, in turn, claimed that Lizeth and the nannies were behind Paulette's disappearance. Each of them, at some point, gave false testimony, said the Attorney General. That's why it is now difficult to establish all the facts and draw a clear investigative line. On March 30th, even before Paulette's body was found, both parents and the nannies were taken into custody, but not to prison. They were held at a nearby hotel where they were questioned by the police. Investigators concluded that Lizeth showed no signs of being affected by her daughter's disappearance. She was defensive, angry, anxious, impulsive, and displayed little empathy for those around her. Mauricio was also anxious, showed no signs of depression, but was evasive and unsure. They were hiding something, yet never told the truth about what they knew or revealed the exact details of what happened to Paulette. It was found that on March 23rd, Lizeth went out with her other daughter and was gone for 7 hours. No one knows what she was doing during that time. We are dealing with a lawyer, intelligent, bold. She always remained distant in terms of showing affection and emotional attachment. She lied, said forensic psychiatry expert Sandra Yadeum at a press conference. She had been working with investigators. In short, there are signs of psychiatric disorder. Upon hearing the expert's opinion, Alberto Basbas became convinced that Lizeth had killed her daughter. He did everything he could to build a case against her, but he had no evidence. The public also turned against the mother, believing she had gotten rid of her special needs child to regain her freedom. After all, it was Lizeth who said the now infamous line, "Even if I lose Paulette, I still have my other daughter." What detectives never told the public was just how poorly they had handled the investigation. They tried to hide their own failures behind accusations against Lizeth. When forensic investigators first arrived, they were only allowed to check for signs of forced entry, nothing else. Alfredo Castillo, according to reports, ordered them to stop almost as soon as they arrived. The crime scene was never sealed. Hundreds of people entered and exited the apartment, leaving shoe prints and contaminating everything. Moreover, friends and relatives of the family stayed overnight in the apartment. Some even slept in Paulette's bed. Police officers working the case were even allowed to use the girl's bathroom. The crime scene was contaminated in the most careless way possible, and any evidence that might have existed by then was rendered useless. What's more, investigators failed to mention that Mauricio Gabarra was close friends with Basbas. Basbas believed Mauricio's version of events suspiciously easily and never stopped blaming Lizeth. Lizeth later claimed in an interview that police constantly threatened her and that at one point detectives even pointed a gun at her head. Despite all this, Basbas's plan partly worked. Everyone in Mexico City believed, and many still believe, that Lizeth, the cold, unstable woman they saw on TV, was the one who killed her innocent daughter. In general, the most common theories surrounding Paulette's death are as follows. Raising a child with serious health issues was too much for a woman who wasn't capable of empathy and lacked maternal warmth. Lizeth may have killed her daughter shortly after her disappearance and hidden the body somewhere in the apartment, perhaps in an air vent or elevator shaft. A neighbor complained that one of the elevators was malfunctioning, bumping into something. Also, a viewer noticed that the pajamas Lizeth showed in an interview before the body was found matched those in which Paulette was later discovered. Lizeth later explained the pajamas belonged to her older daughter. Mauricio and Lizeth were struggling financially and barely managing to pay for their apartment. They may have staged Paulette's kidnapping, hoping to receive ransom money from the grandparents or generous strangers. They hid Paulette in a vent and told her to wait. But when the case attracted massive media attention, they panicked and couldn't retrieve her, resulting in her suffocation. Mauricio himself had once told police, "I know where Paulette is, and I'll tell you everything, but only if you help me, because I don't want legal problems. I'm scared of going to jail. I'm desperate." That was before the girl's body had even been found. Killed by her sister Paulette may have been accidentally killed by her 7-year-old sister, Lizeth. Experts say the older girl may have felt superior to her sister and jealous of the attention Paulette received. Some believe Mauricio and Lizeth were arguing that night, and Paulette began to cry. The older sister may have tried to silence her and accidentally killed her in the process. This theory is supported by secret footage of a conversation between Lizeth, Mauricio, and their older daughter. It seemed as though Lizeth told her daughter not to say anything to the investigators or she'd get in trouble. Lizeth later claimed the words were taken out of context. She was simply warning her daughter to be careful not to say anything that could be misinterpreted by detectives. Of course, the nannies could have been involved, but no evidence supports this. And based on their interrogations and interviews, they did not appear to be guilty. Although it's possible they know more than they're saying, perhaps they were silenced. Under Basbas's influence, public opinion turned harshly against Lizeth. But after reading several news articles in the book by Martin Moreno, many people changed their views. Certainly, Lizeth's behavior can be seen as strange, and she did act oddly in some interviews. But that doesn't automatically make her a killer. Did she feel relief after Paulette's death? Possibly, but the Attorney General launched an excessively aggressive campaign against her, maybe to cover something else up. There's also a possibility that Paulette's father was involved in her death. Some believe Paulette was already dead by the time she returned from Valle de Bravo, and that Baz, being Mauricio's friend, covered for him. No theory can be ruled out. Anyone could have been responsible. Due to the Attorney General's harsh statements, many believed, and still believe, that the parents were somehow involved in their daughter's death. Eventually, they turned against each other. Mauricio stated, "All I can say is that, for me, this was not an accident, but I can only speak for myself." In another interview, Lizeth cried and complained she didn't understand why her husband suspected her, saying investigators turned him against her. "They played with our minds a lot. Maybe he didn't trust me enough. I never doubted him," Lizeth said. In May of that same year, Baz resigned due to how poorly the investigation was handled, and possibly because of his inflammatory remarks. In May 2017, 7 years after the events, Paulette's body was exhumed and cremated, permanently destroying most of the physical evidence in the case. But many still wonder how many secrets remain hidden in the death of Paulette, secrets the public may never know. Three girls, three sisters, got into their father's car and left their mother's home to spend time with him and enjoy a camping trip in nature, something they had done many times before. But this time, they never came back. What began as a disappearance quickly turned into a massive search for 9-year-old Peyton, 8-year-old Evelyn, and 5-year-old Olivia. Police found an abandoned truck, traces of human and animal blood, a tent, plastic bags, and zip ties. But not the father, a man with elite military training who seemed to vanish into thin air. A race against time began to find a man with nothing to lose. Can someone who spent his whole life mastering survival make it to the Canadian border before he's caught? By Friday evening, May 30th, 2025, Travis Decker arrived at the home of his ex-wife, Whitney Decker, in Wenatchee, Washington, to pick up their 3 daughters and spend some time with them, as he usually did. But by 10 p.m., Whitney contacted the police because she was growing worried. The girls were supposed to be home by 8, and she had tried calling Travis multiple times. Each time, it went to voicemail. Wenatchee police wanted to immediately activate the Amber Alert system for missing or abducted children, knowing how impossible it is to ignore an Amber Alert. All TV and radio broadcasts are interrupted, highway signs display the alert, and most importantly, an extremely loud notification is sent to phones, startling but effective. However, the Washington state authorities denied the request, stating there was no cause. Travis had never been accused of domestic violence. He had never harmed the children, something their mother confirmed, and therefore there was no reason to assume the girls were in danger. When Travis and the girls failed to show up at a sporting event the next morning, Saturday, May 31st, police finally decided to inform the public. But once again, they chose not to activate the urgent and far-reaching Amber Alert system. Very soon, they would have to answer for that decision. The girls' mother, Whitney, said that Travis seemed unusually quiet when he came to pick up the children. But she wasn't concerned, at least not until it was time for the girls to come home, and they didn't. Travis had never been late before. He always brought the girls back on time. Whitney tried calling him, but each time the call went straight to voicemail. And since her ex-husband didn't have a permanent address, she had no idea where to look. So Whitney turned to the police. Her fear for the girls' safety grew when Travis didn't show up for work on the morning of June 2nd. When officers visited his workplace and spoke with his supervisor, they were told that Travis had recently been acting off. His emotional state was clearly deteriorating. That same day, June 2nd, police obtained an arrest warrant for 32-year-old Travis Decker on charges of custodial interference. Using automatic license plate recognition technology, authorities learned that at 5:41 p.m. on Friday, shortly after picking the girls up, Travis's vehicle had been headed north across the Wenatchee River Bridge. Police focused all efforts in that direction, while officers also began digging deeper into Travis's background. They learned that Travis and Whitney got married after he returned to the U.S. from Afghanistan. Several generations of Decker men had served in the military, and Travis had likely always known he would follow in their footsteps. As a child, he was athletic, and after graduating high school, he enlisted in the Army. He completed basic combat training and advanced individual training to become an infantryman, one of the most dangerous and physically demanding roles in the military. Just a year later, he was deployed to Afghanistan, where he remained until 2014, undertaking a variety of dangerous missions. In other words, Travis spent years training and practicing how to survive in hostile environments, in the wilderness, often without supplies. He knew how to evade pursuit, think strategically. He knew how to disappear. Unfortunately, it was during that time that his mental health began to deteriorate. He returned to the U.S. not only with medals, but also suffering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Still, it didn't stop him from becoming a husband and the father of 3 beautiful daughters. Back in the U.S., Travis joined the National Guard. The family lived in Wenatchee, a small town in the heart of Washington state, where the Columbia and Wenatchee rivers meet. The couple was married for 7 years, and in the beginning, they were very happy. Travis deeply loved Whitney and the girls, spent all his free time with them, took them to events, and cared for and protected them in every way. According to Whitney, he had never been aggressive or cruel. He never even raised his voice at them. However, his mental health issues became more noticeable over time. Sometimes he would leave in the middle of the night or wake Whitney up with his screaming. He tried multiple times to get help, but according to Whitney, it's incredibly difficult for U.S. veterans to access proper support in their own country. Eventually, Whitney couldn't take it anymore. She filed for divorce on November 14, 2022. Of course, the divorce couldn't be pleasant for the family, but it proceeded in a very civil manner. Neither spouse blamed the other for anything. They simply agreed that separating was the best decision for them and wanted to make sure it wouldn't negatively affect their daughters. According to their agreement, Travis would pick up the girls every other weekend and spend time with them from 6 p.m. on Friday until 6 p.m. on Sunday. Whitney never worried about the children's safety while they were with their father. She was confident they had a good time and that Travis adored them. But by September 2024, she began to question whether Travis was providing the girls with proper living conditions while they were with him. Here's what happened. A month after the divorce, Travis moved into the Wenatchee National Guard Armory building. Despite its name, the building doesn't only store weapons, there are also sleeping barracks. It's not a suitable place for permanent residents, of course, but officers can temporarily stay there as part of an informal arrangement. Travis was allowed to live there for a while, and he actually stayed just a couple of months before moving into an apartment in Wenatchee. However, when the lease ended, he chose not to renew it and returned to the Armory building. Whitney was shocked to find out that her 3 young daughters had been living in such conditions, sleeping on mattresses. She told her ex-husband openly that she was uncomfortable with the idea of the girls spending nights near unfamiliar men. Of course, she wasn't accusing anyone directly, but pointed out that someone could have bad intentions. Anything could happen. After all, Travis couldn't keep an eye on them 24/7. He might be called away or need to sleep himself. A mother's imagination painted terrifying images of what could happen to her daughters, especially since there had already been one incident. On December 19, 2023, while the girls were with their father, Whitney received a video call from their youngest, Olivia. The little girl was crying and screaming. It turned out that she and Peyton had been playing with a back extension machine, and Peyton accidentally dropped weight plates on her sister's fingers. Travis had been outside with the dogs and hadn't seen what was going on, and now he wasn't even comforting them. Peyton had to go find him to explain what had happened. Whitney was also concerned that her ex-husband loved camping and often took the girls with him. In general, she didn't object to such activities, but she didn't always like it when Travis took the girls camping, regardless of the weather. Considering all of this, on September 20th, 2024, Whitney and her divorce attorney filed a request to modify Travis's visitation rights. It wasn't an easy decision for Whitney. She always tried to be fair to her ex. She wasn't one of those women who blamed their former spouses for everything or criticized every move. No, she gave him credit. She acknowledged that he was actively involved in their daughters' lives, was there when they needed him, and he loved them, and they loved him back. But near the end of their marriage, Travis was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and Whitney believed he had stopped taking the medication prescribed to help manage it. She said that over time, Travis's behavior became increasingly strange. For example, once a stranger drove him to her house, and Travis asked to spend time with the girls in her basement. On another occasion, Travis didn't want to pick up the girls at all, saying they were trying not to upset him because they had seen him training his dogs and clearly hadn't liked it. Maybe they were even scared. In other words, it became clear that after the divorce, Travis was struggling to maintain stability in his life. Alongside housing issues, he had problems with work. First, he asked to be moved to part-time hours. Later, he stopped showing up at the National Guard entirely. He had to take on odd jobs to support himself. Travis himself admitted that he used to earn $86,000 a year in the National Guard, and now he was making about $38,000. The fact that he walked away from a military career was shocking. Travis had considered it his calling, a family tradition. That's why Whitney had to ask the court first to order a full psychiatric evaluation for Travis to determine whether he had other potential health issues. And second, that he not be allowed to keep the girls overnight until his housing situation improved. Once Travis secured stable housing, Whitney was clearly willing to resume overnight visits. The judge agreed with her. From then on, Travis could spend weekends with the girls, but without overnight stays. These were the custody terms in place on Friday, May 30th, 2025, when Travis took the children from their mother's home. Meanwhile, the search for the man and his daughters continued. And on June 2nd at 3:45 p.m., a patrol officer discovered Travis's vehicle, a white 2017 GMC Sierra pickup, abandoned near a campground called Rock Island, close to Leavenworth. Officers from the Wenatchee Police Department immediately rushed to the site. Approximately 70 to 90 meters from Travis's truck, on a small embankment, they found the bodies of the three girls. All three were discovered with plastic bags over their heads. Their wrists were bound with zip ties, presumably to prevent them from removing the bags. According to a preliminary report from the medical examiner, all three girls died from asphyxiation. The public still doesn't know exactly how the murders were carried out. Were the victims killed all at once? Or did the perpetrator murder them one by one, leaving the last child to watch in terror as her sisters died? Did the killer observe their suffering? Or did he leave, unable to bear the sight of them fighting desperately for each breath? Of course, none of these scenarios is any less horrific than the others, because the result is the same. 9-year-old Peyton, 8-year-old Evelyn, and 5-year-old Olivia are dead, and they will never return home to their mother. Plastic bags and zip ties were scattered near the bodies. On the tailgate of Travis's truck, forensic investigators found 2 bloody prints. Sheriff Mike Morrison later explained that the blood belonged to a man, most likely Travis, and also to a dog, presumably Travis's own. However, the sheriff stressed that the dog was unharmed. In fact, while officers were working at the crime scene, the dog calmly and gently approached them. She was later turned over to staff at the Humane Society. At the scene, police also discovered a tent and a recently extinguished campfire. Suspicion quickly fell on Travis, if only because he was nowhere to be found. His personal belongings, including his wallet, food, and blankets, were left in the vehicle. Investigators tracked Travis's phone and discovered that he had been in the area on Thursday, May 29th, the day before he picked up the girls. When it became clear that the girls were dead and Travis had become the prime suspect, police spoke again with the children's mother. Whitney noted that on the evening her ex-husband came to pick up the girls, he was unusually quiet. But aside from that, everything seemed normal. Even if something had felt off, she might have dismissed it as part of the emotional instability Travis had long struggled with. She assured officers that she had never before worried about the girls' safety when they were with their father. He never hurt her during their marriage, and he never showed aggression toward the children. He wasn't cruel, harsh, or even raised his voice at them. For her part, she always tried to be understanding of his mental health, knowing what he had endured during his time in Afghanistan. However, when journalists spoke with her neighbor, Bin Yin, who claimed to be a friend of the family, he painted a somewhat different picture of the Deckers' home life. Bin recalled that when he first met Travis, he was a strong, fit man, clean-shaven, confident, and a former soldier who had joined the National Guard. But after Travis moved out of the family home, his appearance began to change, as if reflecting the shifts happening inside him. Bin often saw him when Travis came to pick up the girls. The former serviceman had deteriorated significantly. He had lost weight, stopped shaving, and his hair had grown out. It didn't look like a style choice. It looked like someone who had stopped taking care of himself. On May 30th, when Travis came to pick up his daughters, Bin exchanged a few words with him. According to the neighbor, Travis seemed very sad. During the short conversation, he repeated the same questions, as if forgetting he had already asked them. Bin found this strange, though he was aware Travis had mental health issues. But the most striking thing Bin told the reporters was that Whitney had once confided in him that Travis had hit her. It was these emotional outbursts, he said, that ultimately led to the divorce. It's unlikely Bin would lie to journalists knowing Whitney might hear what he said. Still, we can only guess what the true dynamics of the family were. In any case, Whitney never believed Travis would hurt the children. So even if he had been abusive toward her, she may have chosen not to bring that up in court, for fear that a judge would limit Travis's ability to see the girls. She understood what was going on in his mind, what had made him this way. And God knows she tried everything she could to ensure he remained an important part of their daughters' lives. After the girls' bodies were discovered, a judge issued a warrant for the arrest of Travis Decker on charges of triple homicide and 3 counts of kidnapping. An extensive manhunt for the suspect began in the Wenatchee Mountains. According to Sheriff Mike Morrison, this is one of the largest search operations ever conducted in the region. A wide array of agencies and organizations were brought in. Dozens of officers are combing the difficult terrain, joined by K-9 units with tracking dogs. Helicopters and drones equipped with thermal imaging are scanning the area from above. GoPro cameras are being lowered into bodies of water in case Travis is already dead. Law enforcement is not ruling out that possibility, and here's why. Unfortunately, cases where a parent kills their own child are not as rare as we might wish. So much so that there are detailed statistics on such crimes. Both mothers and fathers can become perpetrators, but their motives and methods often differ. Men are more likely to commit such acts, and their victims are usually older children, while mothers more often kill infants, sometimes within the first 24 hours of life. Mental illness plays a significant role in many of these tragedies. 60% of parental murderers, especially mothers, suffer from depression or psychosis. What's more relevant to this case, over a quarter of perpetrators attempt to take their own lives after the crime, and fathers are more likely to do so than mothers. But why would anyone commit such an unthinkable crime? It's difficult to comprehend how someone who is supposed to love, protect, and care for a child could take their life. Still, experts generally recognize 5 key motives. First is altruistic filicide, in which a parent believes death is in the child's best interest, to protect them from real or imagined suffering. Second is acute psychosis, when the parent's grasp on reality is severely distorted, often involving hallucinations. Third is the killing of an unwanted child who is seen as a burden. Fourth is accidental death as a result of ongoing abuse, where violence escalates over time and ends fatally. The fifth is revenge against a partner, a motive seen most often in fathers, particularly amid custody disputes or when domestic abuse has already been present in the family. Which of these can be ruled out in Travis Decker's case? If he truly committed this crime, this was clearly not an accident. Acute psychosis is unlikely. He had emotional instability, but not full-blown psychosis. There's no reason to believe he viewed his 3 daughters as unwanted. On the contrary, he consistently wanted more time with them, not less. Altruistic motives usually end with the entire family dead, yet Whitney was untouched. Travis is believed to be alive, and even his beloved dog was spared. It's far more likely that Travis was emotionally exhausted and overwhelmed by a series of life failures and decided to send a message. A brutal, unmistakable message of revenge directed at Whitney. His problems had been building: fear of losing access to his daughters, financial struggles, even telling Whitney he might have to give up his dogs because he couldn't care for them. Perhaps in his mind, she hadn't supported him, even though in reality, Whitney had stood by him more than anyone else in his life. If revenge was the motive, Travis may have taken his own life after killing Peyton, Evelyn, and Olivia. Many fathers who commit such acts of vengeance don't survive much longer themselves. Of course, only Travis can truly reveal what motivated him. The media has reported that a note was found in his vehicle, but Sheriff Mike Morrison has not confirmed that and says the goal remains to find Travis alive so that he can explain his actions himself. The police released 2 videos to inform the public about what Travis might look like and how he behaved shortly before the tragedy. The first video was captured by a doorbell camera at a residence, showing Travis approaching and attempting to open the door and enter. However, none of the residents knew him. This video was recorded before Travis picked up the girls on May 30th. Additionally, in May 2025, Travis was involved in 2 car accidents, on May 4th and May 27th. He was issued a fine because he did not have insurance. The officer's body camera captured their interaction, where Travis asked several times if he would be arrested and why. The officer patiently answered all his questions, and Travis politely said goodbye and left. Detectives also discovered that by that time Travis was already struggling with heavy thoughts, because on May 26th he searched the internet for how to move to Canada, how to immigrate to Canada, and jobs in Canada. This is curious since Canada does not extradite suspects facing the death penalty in their home country. However, Washington state does not have the death penalty, meaning Travis is not at risk of capital punishment here, and Canada would not protect him even if he managed to get there. Moreover, to reach the Canadian border, Travis would have to travel through the mountains, difficult and varied terrain, for several weeks. Is this possible? For an average person, the answer is a clear no. But Travis is not an average person. He is an exception because he knows, is trained, and even enjoys living in such conditions. His father said that Travis sometimes went into the mountains and stayed there for up to 2.5 months. In other words, he knows the area, has studied it, could prepare supplies for himself, and most importantly, has the knowledge to avoid capture for an extended period. He wouldn't be the first fugitive to try to hide in the Washington mountains. In 2020, Jorge Alcantara Gonzalez, wanted for murder and similarly experienced in mountain survival, managed to evade capture for 23 days. On the other hand, this is extremely difficult both psychologically and physically. It's not only about surviving constant police pursuit, but also about finding food. While drinking water can be obtained using modern, lightweight filters, food is more complicated. Travis would either have to carry provisions or hunt, but then he would need to make a fire to cook meat, a fire that would sooner or later give away his position. He could set traps, but that requires staying nearby for some time, waiting for prey, and again, preparing food. Relying solely on wild plants in the mountains is not an option because the heavy physical strain and adrenaline from being chased burn a lot of calories, and without protein, Travis wouldn't last long. Due to these factors, police are not confident they will find him alive. However, as Sheriff Mike Morrison said, they are not ready to rule out any possibilities yet, especially since on June 10th, police may have gotten a lead. Near Blewett Pass, they found an item believed to belong to Travis. Also, a group of hikers reported seeing a lone traveler who appeared poorly equipped for the conditions and seemed to avoid other hikers. Search teams immediately responded by sending a helicopter to the area. The helicopter did spot a lone hiker who left the trail and quickly disappeared when the helicopter flew overhead. Tracking dogs were brought to the spot where he vanished and followed his trail to Ingalls Creek Trail, where it was lost. Then, on the evening of July 1st, police received a tip from a local resident who claimed to have seen Travis near Snoqualmie Pass. If true, Travis covered an enormous distance, nearly 60 kilometers from Leavenworth. Despite the massive search effort, Travis or his body has not been found. A reward of $20,000 is offered for information on his whereabouts. Police do not know if he is armed, but he is definitely considered dangerous. Officers have urged local residents, especially those in remote areas, to lock their homes and outbuildings. If Travis truly wanted to take revenge on Whitney, he chose the most innocent victims for his vengeance. Whitney's lawyer said that even after what happened, Whitney is trying to find sympathy for her ex-husband in her heart. Finding the strength to try to understand after such a tragedy is priceless, and clearly not something everyone can do. The woman explained that Travis repeatedly tried to get help, but it is very difficult for U.S. veterans to obtain services. Also, if the police had agreed to use the Amber Alert system, the girls might still be alive today. That is why Whitney believes the system failed her family, especially her daughters. Whitney is not ready to speak to the press, but did speak at the farewell ceremony for Peyton, Evelyn, and Olivia. She shared a family tradition. At the end of each day, they would name 3 feelings they experienced during the day. Peyton always had more than 3 and couldn't stop talking, telling her mother everything. Evelyn preferred to share hers privately with her mom. Olivia was not yet able to fully describe what she felt, but one of her constant feelings was happiness. Whitney encouraged everyone to adopt this sweet, kind, and joyful tradition in memory of her 3 daughters, whom she lost in one day because they were all so different, yet each incredible in her own way.
Plots that real life creates are sometimes more incredible than the most inventive fiction. This case, which gains such wide publicity due to its similarity to the plot of a famous thriller, is yet another confirmation. Because even in the most unimaginable horror movies, one can find more meaning than in the life of this seemingly ordinary family. The Maguad family is a typical middle-class family living in the province of Cotabato in the Philippines. Cruz Maguad is a teacher for senior classes in a school, while his wife Lavella holds the position of a primary school director. Cruz and Lavella were happy parents to their 18-year-old daughter, Crisol Gwen, and 16-year-old son, Crisvel Louis, affectionately known as Boy Boy. Louis was excelling in his studies, with dreams of becoming a lawyer. He was the person others sought out with their problems because he always had the right words to say and knew how to uplift a friend. Gwen, like her brother, was a very popular teenager. She attended preparatory courses at the university and planned to pursue a career in medicine. In her free time, she participated in beauty pageants and sports competitions. In other words, Gwen had it all: loving and caring parents, beauty, intelligence, and a wonderful personality. She also possessed an incredibly kind heart. It was precisely because of her kindness that, in July 2021, the Maguire family experienced an addition. But not a baby, rather another teenager. During a family gathering, Gwen met a 17-year-old girl named Janice, who had been helping either the relatives or friends of the Maguire family to care for their two young children. The two girls quickly became friends, and Janice shared with Gwen that she was an orphan, practically homeless, and under the care of authorities. She expressed her desire not to be with the children anymore and dreamt of living with Gwen. Compassionate Gwen asked her parents to allow Janice to move in with them, and surprisingly, they agreed. Being teachers, they felt the need to help children, especially those in need. Moreover, they were genuinely afraid that if they didn't accept Janice into their family, something bad might happen to her, and she might even be forced into undesirable circumstances. Cruz and Lavella couldn't bear to let that happen, so in July 2021, they essentially adopted Janice. They not only welcomed her into their family but cared for her as if she were their own daughter, assisting her with her studies and even discussing her future college plans. Of course, there were difficulties at the beginning. Within the first month of Janice moving in, the family's 10,000 pesos, approximately 15,000 rubles, went missing. The money was quickly found hidden in Janice's backpack. When confronted, she tearfully apologized, and Gwen pleaded for her to be given a second chance. Understanding that Janice wasn't accustomed to this life and couldn't resist the temptation to take the money, Cruz and Lavella forgave her. Surprisingly, after this incident, the bonds in the family became even stronger and better. Gwen grew attached to Janice, caring for her as if she were a sister. Even Louis gave up his room and slept on the couch in the living room so that Janice could have her own bedroom. Surrounded by love and care, Janice blossomed and reciprocated the affection within her new family. On December 10, 2021, at 2:58 p.m., Cruz Maguire was fixing something at the school where his wife worked when he received a call, urgently telling him to return home because burglars had broken into their house. It took him about 17 minutes to rush home. He swung open the gate and ran to the front door. Near the entrance, he found a blood-soaked blanket and a knife. He called out for his son, but there was no response. Cruz turned the doorknob to open the door, but it was locked. He then rushed to the back of the house, continuing to call for his son and daughter. Another door was also locked, so he had to break it down. Entering from the kitchen to the living room, he was stunned to see the bodies of his children lying in a pool of blood. His daughter was just a few steps away from her room, covered in bruises and knife wounds all over her body. Insects were already attracted to her blood. Louis was lying by the front door, bound by his hands and feet, with a gag in his mouth. His body also had multiple stab wounds, which seemed to have been inflicted recently. Beside Gwen and Louis lay a baseball bat, a hammer, and broken bottles. It is difficult to imagine the anguish the father felt finding his children in such a state. But he knew that there was another child, his adopted daughter, still inside the house, so he continued to search the rooms, fearing to find another lifeless body. Suddenly, the girl appeared, coming out of her room. Cruz recalls that she looked terrified. Her hair was wet, and she said she didn't hear his cries because she was in the shower. Cruz found her behavior strange but assumed that people react differently in shock, perhaps trying to dissociate themselves from reality by engaging in routine activities. In any case, Cruz didn't have time to dwell on it. He needed to call the police and inform his wife of the horrific incident, that someone brutally killed their son and daughter. Fortunately, there was a survivor of the attack, and when the police arrived, they promptly interviewed Janice. Once she regained her composure, she recounted that 3 masked men had broken into the house. She witnessed them launching vicious attacks on Louis. Frightened, Janice managed to hide under her bed in her room, trying to remain as quiet and inconspicuous as possible. Despite the fear, she was able to access Facebook and post a message, alerting others that intruders had entered the house. Apparently, someone saw the post and called crews, who immediately rushed home upon receiving the distressing news. The cruelty of the crime confirmed the girl's words. Considering that multiple weapons were used in the crime and that the robbers managed to overpower 2 teenagers, there must have been several killers. Judging by the bruises on Gwen's arms, she fought desperately for her life, but the attackers were too strong. The investigators quickly discovered that the perpetrators had enough time after the murder to clean up the blood and change their clothes in the family's bathroom. They then put the dirty items in a bag and attempted to dispose of it in the canal, but a branch blocked their path, leading to its discovery by forensic experts. However, Janice was clearly mistaken about some things. The pathologist determined that Louis couldn't have been killed first, as his wounds still appeared fresh when the father arrived home, while Gwen's blood had already begun to dry, attracting ants. The police noticed that Janice's room was in great disarray, as if the criminals meticulously searched every corner. In such a case, it would have been impossible not to notice someone hiding under the bed. Moreover, the rage with which the intruders attacked Gwen and Louis puzzled the investigators. Typically, burglars aim to find valuable items and leave the crime scene quickly, rather than attacking teenagers with such unprecedented cruelty. Especially since they didn't take anything valuable besides the victims' phones. It was also strange that the murder occurred around 2 a.m., but Janice posted a plea for help on Facebook at almost 3 a.m. Why did she wait almost an hour to report the attack on her brother and sister? Why choose a Facebook post instead of calling her parents or the police? She might have been afraid that the intruders would hear her, but it's difficult to imagine being in her position, when it's a matter of life and death, and fear grips every inch of your body. How one could write a lengthy post without making any mistakes and even selecting several sad emojis to illustrate her words. In any case, Gwen's boyfriend saw her post immediately and promptly called Janice. She answered, but remained silent, and there was an eerie silence in the background. Shortly after, Janice changed her name on Facebook and eventually deleted the post. However, the main clue to the identity of the culprit lay in the fact that all the weapons used in the crime belonged to the family. The fact that the burglars brought no weapons with them, and the baseball bat, knives, and hammer were all from the family's possessions, raised further questions. Only Gwen and Janice knew where the hammer was, as the Magwads had recently had guests, and Lavella asked her daughters to put it away so it wouldn't be in the way. The baseball bat was lying on the top bunk of Louis' 2-story bed, which Janice now occupied. To use the bat, the intruder would have had to go into Janice's room and take it. These are not the places where a stranger unfamiliar with the layout of the house would find such items. Finally, the police lifted fingerprints from the baseball bat and compared them to Janice's, and they matched. The evidence continued to accumulate, pointing to the least likely suspect. Therefore, the police called Janice in for questioning once again. Finally, on December 16, when Janice was confronted with all the evidence that contradicted her statements, she confessed to her lawyer that she was the one who killed Gwen and Louis. But how did she manage to overpower 2 teenagers, aged 16 and 18? She had an accomplice, a 17-year-old boy named Carl, who served in the local church. The police shared screenshots of their conversations with the public, confirming that the murder was premeditated. Janice knew where the items that could be used as weapons were located, and she had everything prepared in advance. Janice admitted that envy towards Gwen and anger towards the teenagers pushed her to commit the murder. After her confession, Janice's friends and acquaintances revealed that she had always been quite two-faced. On one side, She presented herself as friendly, kind, and caring, but behind people's backs, she showed an entirely different side. She allegedly considered the Magwood family to be poor and spoke unfavorably about them. Cruz Magwood later stated, "She was envious and insecure, so she resented Gwen. I've heard such things about her character. When she's angry with someone, she seeks to harm them. She dreamed of taking Gwen's place." Perhaps that's why on the day of Gwen and Luis's murder, Janice referred to Cruz and Lavella as her mom and dad. She wanted to be the only daughter in the family, receiving all the attention, care, and possibly money. Such uncontrollable behavior and the crimes she committed led the media to compare her to Esther, the main character of the movie Orphan. It's a thriller about a family that adopts a little girl with an angelic face, who turns out to be a heartless killer. Interestingly, it was one of Janice's favorite movies, and she even asked Cruz to watch it together, but he declined as he had already seen it and didn't like it. However, just like the movie character, Janice wasn't an orphan. Her parents are alive, and besides her, there are 3 more children in the family. However, her father neglected the family, didn't want to work, and they lived in almost poverty. Janice's parents separated when her mother found work in Davao City, the main port of Mindanao Island. Leaving for work, her mother left Janice under the care of her father. But since he practically didn't take care of the children, Janice was placed under the care of the Department of Social Welfare and Development of the Philippines for 8 years. On December 20, 2021, Gwen and Luisa bid their final farewell. The family didn't celebrate the New Year's festivities as they usually did, as it was a family holiday, and they couldn't find joy in welcoming the new year without Gwen and Luis. We extend our condolences to the parents of the slain teenagers. With new evidence, we are confident that we can achieve justice for their children, said Vice Governor of Cotabato, Emilu Mendoza. What's particularly sad about this case is that the main suspect in the murder of the teenagers is their adopted daughter, whom the family cared for as their own. It's unfathomable to imagine how a 17-year-old girl, who was given a second chance to live a better life with a loving adoptive family, could not only carry out but even conceive such a furious act of murder. Pending trial and sentencing, the accused are under the custody of the Department of Social Welfare and Development of the Philippines. Cruz and Lavella complained that the official Philippine authorities treat and care for underage criminals much better than they do for the underage victims. Lavella recounted her encounter with the accused during their official arraignment. "We saw the criminals who didn't show any signs of remorse. One was properly dressed, in a black long-sleeved shirt tucked into blue jeans, wearing dark glasses, escorted by a social welfare worker and a plainclothes policeman, while the other came with a representative of the official Philippine authorities and their parents. I envied how well they looked, how they were protected. I wanted to confront them face to face or look them in the eyes and ask why. But I could only tightly hold my husband's hand and cry because we couldn't do anything since the law protects them."
This case takes us to Esto, a very small and quiet town in the state of Florida, with a population of fewer than 500 people. August 2007 was incredibly hot in Esto, and on the 8th, the thermometer climbed above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius. In the heat of the day, a 911 operator answered a call. A frightened woman was screaming that her daughter had fallen into the pool and urgently needed help.
911.
I need an ambulance.
What's wrong, ma'am?
My daughter fell in the pool and she's not breathing.
Where at, ma'am?
In Esto. Oh, God.
Just a second, ma'am.
Her lips are purple. What do I do?
Ma'am?
Water's just coming out of her nose.
Yes, sir. Ma'am?
Huh?
You said water's coming out of her nose?
Yes, I've got her on her side and she's coming out of her nose every time I move her.
Okay, hang on just a second.
Please hurry.
Rescue? Yes, ma'am. I've got them on the way. I'm going to see if they can do something to help you. Hang on just a moment.
When emergency responders arrived at the scene, they were met with a horrifying sight. A young woman was kneeling over a little girl, performing first aid. The girl was identified as 7-year-old Adriana Hodo. The woman turned out to be her mother, 27-year-old Amanda Lewis. For a moment, it seemed the medics' efforts were paying off when they found a pulse in Adriana. She was airlifted to Panama City Medical Center's intensive care unit, where doctors fought for her life for an hour. Sadly, their efforts failed. At 5:05 p.m., Adriana Hutto was pronounced dead. Little Adriana was just 1 month away from her 8th birthday. She lived in Esto with her mother Amanda, her younger brother AJ, Andrew Jordan, her mother's boyfriend Alan Carnley, and his 14-year-old son, Alan Michael Carnley. Adriana was a very energetic child. In contrast, Andrew Jordan, whom everyone called AJ, was a quiet and calm boy. He could sit in a corner and play for hours without bothering anyone. After Adriana was taken to the hospital, Amanda was asked to stop by the police station to answer a few questions. Amanda agreed, and when she arrived, she was invited to explain what had happened. Amanda explained that she worked as a nurse at a nursing home, and that morning she had come home after a night shift that ended at 8 a.m. While the kids were watching cartoons, she, as usual, lay down to get some rest and regain energy after a sleepless night. Later, she planned to take the children to the store to buy school supplies. She napped until around noon or 1 p.m. Alan's son was also resting in his room. By noon, the weather outside had become very hot, and the kids wanted to cool off in the pool. Amanda told them that they would be going shopping soon, so there wouldn't be time to splash around. The kids then ran outside to play while she continued getting ready. It's worth noting that earlier that summer, Alan had bought a pool for the kids. It was 120 centimeters tall, and the only way they could get in was by climbing a ladder and then descending it into the pool. The children were only allowed in the pool under adult supervision. When neither Alan nor Amanda was present, they would lock the ladder in the shed, and only they had the key. Additionally, when the pool wasn't in use, it was always kept covered, except when Alan added chemicals to disinfect the water, which required the cover to stay off for 2 days. He had done just that a few days before the tragedy. That day, as Amanda continued getting ready, AJ ran into the house and said that Adriana was in the pool. Knowing the girl couldn't have climbed over the high edge by herself, Amanda assumed he meant she was by the pool and told him to ask his sister to come inside. When a few minutes passed and the children didn't appear, Amanda went to check on them. Walking into the yard, she noticed her little son using a net as if trying to fish something out of the water. When she ran to the pool, she saw her daughter inside. Amanda began performing CPR and called 911. In a state of panic, she told the dispatcher that her daughter had fallen into the pool, wasn't breathing, and needed help urgently. What happened next was already known to the police. The emergency responder, who was the first to react to Amanda's call, saw a small child's wagon near the pool with footprints from children's shoes on it. He concluded that Adriana had climbed onto the wagon, leaned over the edge of the pool, fell into the water, and was unable to get out, possibly because she hit her head. The police officers who arrived at the scene confirmed that there were no signs of foul play. They also didn't notice any inconsistencies in Amanda's account. As a result, based on the totality of the evidence, the case was ruled a tragic accident, but within a few hours, the police were stunned by news that forced them to reconsider their theory of what had happened. Adriana and AJ's grandfather called the police and reported that his grandson, the only witness to the incident, had information they needed to hear. Initially, AJ spoke with an officer who lacked experience in interviewing very young witnesses, which later led to doubts about the accuracy of the child's statements. Nonetheless, the boy told the officer that their mother was responsible for what had happened. He said Adriana had sprayed glass cleaner inside the house, which made their mom very angry. According to the boy, their mother then dunked Adriana in the water. When the officer asked him to clarify what he meant by dunked, the boy replied, "Drowned her." He even placed his hand over his face to demonstrate how it allegedly happened. Later, a female officer trained to work with young witnesses spoke with AJ, and he repeated that their mother was responsible. However, his story was so inconsistent that he often contradicted himself. First of all, he said he hadn't seen the incident, only heard his sister screaming. AJ claimed his mom had sent Adriana to the local park and later drove after her in the car. He wasn't sure whether the girl ended up in the water before or after that supposed trip to the park. But Alan's 14-year-old son later firmly stated that he hadn't heard anyone start the car engine or leave the house that day. At one point, AJ claimed to have seen everything from a tree under which the family kept a garbage can. But when officers went to check this claim, they discovered that from that spot, the boy either couldn't see the pool at all or could only see a small part of it from a distance. Despite the gaps and clear contradictions in the child's account, the police began investigating the possible involvement of his mother in Adriana's death. Soon they discovered that the atmosphere within the family was far from healthy. As the police began to dig deeper into the family's life, they discovered that Adriana had been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Children with this condition often struggle with concentration, are impulsive, and may seek attention through deliberate misbehavior. In other words, raising Adriana was much more challenging than raising AJ. During a search of the home, officers noted that the rooms were untidy, and there was an unpleasant odor in the children's bedroom, as the girl frequently wet the bed. But what concerned the investigators most was what they didn't find: children's toys. Amanda explained that she had taken away the toys as punishment for the kids not cleaning up their room. They would likely have gotten them back within a week, she said. For the time being, she had stored the toys in the shed. However, in the photos of the shed taken by police, no toys were visible. The police were also troubled by Amanda's behavior at the hospital. Dr. Linda Fox, a physician in the ICU, recounted that after she described Adriana's critical condition to Amanda and asked if she had any questions, Amanda simply asked where the vending machine was. After Adriana passed away, Amanda did not cry or show any visible emotion, which the doctor found unsettling. However, many people who knew Amanda well said this was typical of her. She rarely expressed her feelings outwardly and tended to keep everything bottled up inside. Amanda's lawyer, Walter Smith, argued that the mother's emotional state was better reflected in her 911 call. She was hysterical. She even vomited. Who could fake that kind of reaction? He asked. She'd have to be Meryl Streep. Amanda was offered a polygraph test, which she agreed to take, and passed successfully. However, the police continued their investigation. According to her attorney, she was considered guilty in the eyes of law enforcement simply because they believed they had a witness to the crime. But in his view, a 6-year-old child can be convinced of almost anything. His opinion is echoed by Dr. Stephen Ceci, an expert in child testimony. He described the initial police interview with the boy as entirely unsatisfactory, noting that questioning children, especially those like AJ, who showed signs of developmental delay, requires particular care. AJ exhibited behavior more typical of a 4-year-old than a 6-year-old. Dr. Ceci had conducted numerous studies demonstrating how easily children's memories and statements can be influenced. It often takes only a slight nudge for children to make shocking or implausible claims. In one experiment, children were told that a rabbit had visited their school. Although no such event had occurred and the children hadn't seen any rabbit, they not only insisted that they had, but also offered detailed descriptions: what the rabbit looked like, what it ate, and so on. In another test, children recounted in vivid detail how they had gone up the Eiffel Tower and released balloons from the top. None of it had happened, but the children were utterly convincing, Ceci recalled. He believes that when AJ later repeated his story to a more experienced officer that same evening, the detailed and violent nature of what he said could not have come solely from his imagination. In Ceci's opinion, someone, a grown-up, must have influenced the boy between the incident and the police interview. Some members of Amanda's family, and Amanda herself, are convinced they know who that adult was. They suspect Charles Burns, AJ's grandfather. In reality, Burns was Amanda's stepfather, not her biological father. Although he is now divorced from Amanda's mother, Brenda Burns, in 2007 they were still married. That day, Charles arrived at Amanda's house about half an hour after the incident. He then spent at least 15 minutes alone with AJ while driving him to his own home. Amanda's mother, Brenda, confirmed that she wouldn't be surprised if Charles had influenced her grandson because he hated Amanda. Charles denies telling AJ what to say, though he admits he didn't like his stepdaughter, allegedly because he disagreed with her parenting style. After rumors spread through the town that Amanda might have been involved in her daughter's death, people began to recall another loss in her life. When Amanda was 17 years old, she gave birth to a son named Alex. According to relatives, she was an incredibly loving and devoted mother. But when Alex was just over a year old, he died from a sudden seizure while Amanda had briefly left him sleeping alone in another room. An autopsy was conducted at the time, and the results confirmed that Alex had died from a seizure. However, after Adriana's death, questions resurfaced about what had really happened, especially since the theory that Adriana could have climbed onto a cart and fallen into the pool was unintentionally contradicted by her own grandmother, who shared that Adriana had a deep, paralyzing fear of water. Fuel was added to the fire by statements from Amanda's co-workers, who recalled that about 3 months before Adriana's death, Amanda came to work visibly upset because her daughter had drawn all over her new car with a permanent marker. In a moment of frustration, Amanda allegedly said she was tired of everything, that she felt like killing her daughter, and that she didn't love her enough. Amanda later tried to explain that it was just a figure of speech and that she had never seriously thought about harming either of her children. She also admitted that bonding with Adriana hadn't come easy. When Adriana was 6 months old, Amanda had to return to active military duty, so the child was cared for by family members for a period of time. But eventually, Amanda was discharged early due to an injury, and over time, she and Adriana developed a strong, loving relationship. Nonetheless, a month after Adriana's death, Amanda was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The 27-year-old woman was facing life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was offered a plea deal. If she pleaded guilty, she would serve 10 years and be released before turning 40. However, she refused, stating that she would not admit to something she didn't do. In February 2008, Amanda stood trial. The prosecution aimed to show that Amanda was exhausted from work and struggling to manage her completely uncontrollable daughter. They argued that on the day of Adriana's death, her patience finally snapped when the girl sprayed glass cleaner inside the house, prompting Amanda to punish her, only for the situation to spiral out of control. The prosecution's key witness was AJ. His testimony began with an unexpected moment. The boy, whose memory could determine the outcome of the case, didn't even recognize his own mother in the courtroom, even though she was sitting just 2 meters away. It was only when the prosecutor pointed her out that AJ recognized Amanda and burst into tears. Amanda later admitted that the whole scene broke her heart, especially since she hadn't been allowed near her son and hadn't expected that he wouldn't recognize her at all, even though they hadn't seen each other in 6 months. She begged her lawyer to stop the trial, but no one listened. Once AJ calmed down, he repeated his accusations against his mother. However, just like during his conversations with the police, his statements contradicted each other. He couldn't even pinpoint where he had been during the incident, claiming he was either by the family's garbage can under a tree or on the house's steps, neither of which provided a clear view of the pool. At one point, he even said his sister didn't drown in the pool at all. Then he claimed he didn't know how she drowned. Later, he stated Adriana had slipped after climbing onto the toy cart while trying to scoop bugs out of the water. In any other case, such testimony would likely be deemed inadmissible, as AJ gave a different answer every time he was asked what happened. In total, the boy offered 13 completely different versions of the events, blending together incidents from weeks before. The only consistent part of his story was that he never actually saw what happened. He only heard his sister screaming. Still, the prosecutor argued that AJ wasn't the only witness who swayed the jury in favor of the prosecution. The defense had the hardest time explaining the appearance of bruises on Adriana's face, back of her head, and shoulder. The prosecutor argued that these were fingerprint marks from Amanda and that they corroborated EJ's testimony. However, it's important to make a small remark here. The forensic pathologist Charles Siebert, who performed the autopsy and concluded that Adriana's death was violent, was fired and stripped of his license due to his negligent approach to work and controversial conclusions in other cases. Therefore, a different medical expert gave testimony in his place. This expert was not present during the autopsy and had only reviewed Siebert's notes. She stated that she agreed with Siebert's conclusions and suggested how the bruises on the girl's face might have appeared by placing her hand on her own face, just as EJ had shown. Amanda's lawyer challenged this statement, arguing that there could be many reasons for bruises to appear on a small child's body, especially one as active as Adriana. Despite the medical claims that they did not touch the girl's forehead, the bruises could have appeared when Adriana was given first aid or resuscitated at the hospital. It was even unclear what exactly had happened while the children were playing outside. At one point, EJ mentioned that he had thrown a white bucket at the girl. Dr. Siebert based his conclusions mainly on the petechial hemorrhages in Adriana's eye membranes, believing they could only occur in cases of violent death. However, Amanda's lawyer asked Dr. Edward Willey, who had performed 2,000 autopsies in his career, to give his expert opinion. He reviewed Siebert's report and stated that he was not convinced by it, and he would not claim that a murder had occurred because recent studies showed that petechial hemorrhages could also occur in accidental deaths. Additionally, if everything had happened as the medical expert suggested, Amanda would have had to cover the girl's face with her left hand while holding her right shoulder with her right hand, where another large bruise was found. This meant that Amanda would not only have had to lean over the edge of the pool, but also cross her arms for some reason while trying to control her daughter with her left hand, even though she was right-handed. In addition, the defense presented numerous facts that painted a very different picture of the family's life. Amanda claimed that the children had behaved perfectly that morning and had not been punished for anything. In fact, it was revealed that after an incident in which Adriana had fought at school and another incident where she threatened her brother with a knife, Amanda had sought help from a specialist who prescribed medication to help manage Adriana's condition. The medication had worked. The girl's behavior had significantly improved, and both her family and teachers noticed the change. Alan, who also testified in court, explained that the spray incident had happened 2 weeks before Adriana's death and that it was not a glass cleaner, but simply an air freshener. He also provided an explanation for the missing toys. Alan and Amanda had gone through the children's toys, throwing away the broken ones and taking the rest to his father's house for storage for a few days in order to teach the children to clean up their rooms. Alan, his son, and other witnesses testified that Adriana was not afraid of water. They had often seen her happily splashing around in deeper pools, in the bay, and at a Waterworld theme park on vacation. The one thing she was afraid of was diving, when her head would go underwater. According to Alan, Amanda called him around 2:30 p.m. that day to warn him that she and the children were going shopping. While they were talking, EJ entered the house and said something to his mother, though Alan did not hear what. However, he did hear Amanda go outside, after which she found Adriana in the pool. A police phone check confirmed that Amanda's call to Alan was recorded at 2:30 p.m., and just 8 minutes later, at 2:38 p.m., a 911 call was made. Finally, Adriana's teacher took the stand and testified that the child had previously had behavioral issues. But in recent months, there had been significant progress. She described Amanda as a very attentive mother who frequently visited the school and attended all meetings and award ceremonies. Adriana spoke very fondly of her mother and younger brother, showing great affection and love for them. However, despite all the efforts of the defense attorneys, they were unable to persuade the jury, who had evidently already formed their opinion about Amanda's involvement in the incident. After 4 days of trial, the jury deliberated for only 2 hours, including a lunch break, before reaching a verdict. Amanda was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Although, in the eyes of the law, the case was officially closed, the question remains, was it irrefutably proven in court that Amanda Lewis was guilty of the heinous crime? Or were there reasonable doubts about her guilt? Additionally, should a 7-year-old child have been allowed to testify, knowing that his mother would spend the rest of her life in prison solely because of his words? Many still believe she was unjustly convicted and that EJ should not have been put on the stand at such a young age. Others, however, are convinced that the young boy had no reason to lie about what he had seen. In 2010, Amanda's lawyers filed an appeal, but it was unsuccessful. Had she pleaded guilty, she would have been a free woman by 2018. Now she serves a life sentence, no longer holding any hope of freedom. Many may wonder if EJ changed his mind as he grew older. Unfortunately, there is no answer to this question, as the last time Amanda saw her son, he smiled and waved goodbye to her as he left the courtroom. She has not spoken to him and has not received any letters from him. The boy was adopted by a family who cared for him after Amanda's arrest, and his surname is no longer Hutto.